You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Please welcome to the stage Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley, victims advocates, writers, and the co-host of the Mind Over Murder podcast. They are joined by their moderator and CrimeCon favorite, Sheryl McCollum, an Atlanta-based CSI and host of the Zone 7 podcast.
Woo! Let's do this, baby.
Yeah.
Ooh. I'll be keeping this, thank you.
Oh, are these souvenir pillows?
Yes, I've never seen them. Hey, let's get something out of the way real quick. For 37 years, Bill Thomas has fought for his sister. Yep.
Which makes me old.
Seriously, 37 years. I just find that not only heartwarming, but just so impressive. And I'm going to tell you something else. When it's your family and you're fighting for justice and you're hitting the streets every day, that is amazing. But when you can find a sidekick that is just as devoted and works just as hard, like Kristin Dilley, I don't know what to say about her, except just extraordinary human being. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Because we were here at CrimeCon last year, and somebody was like, oh, I know who that is. I don't want to say what they said. I'm not going to repeat it, but they lessened what she does and what she and Bill do together. So I just wanted to say out loud, this is a partnership. They are both investigators. They are both podcasters. They both have such a hand in why we are here today. So let's talk about why we're here today. Let's talk about, and we don't always get to say this from this stage, so I'm going to stand up and say it. We got a break in the case. Yes. And it's in large part because of what these two are doing. I'm not going to take up any more time because just to let you know, I could talk about Bill and Kristin a long time. But I even have notes because I don't know if y'all know this, but Kristin Dilley is a professional educator, and she has sent me a few notes. I had a flashback from high school. So I would get one email. Here's the PowerPoint. Review it, please. Here are some side notes. Please review and get back to me. Here are the questions that I would like for you to ask.
You make me sound so bossy, Mac.
So, not bossy, but honey, we're going to stay on track and we're going to stay on point. Is that fine? And I love her for it. So if it's all right with y'all, I'm just going to kick this off.
You go ahead.
Sure.
That groovy? All right.
Go right ahead.
On January the 8th, 2024, the FBI and the Virginia State Police held a joint press conference in Norfolk, Virginia, announcing the identity of the perpetrator of the 1987 murders of Robin Edwards and David Knobling, one of the 4 double homicides in the group collectively known as the Colonial Parkway Murders. The perpetrator, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., was a commercial waterman, deceased since 2017, and had been linked to 3 of the victims via DNA. Today, we're going to take you all inside the explosive and dramatic developments in the Colonial Parkway Murders and this discovery of a new serial killer in Tidewater, Virginia, a killer who may have been hunting and killing for as long as 40 years. I'm Sheryl McCollum, the host of Zone 7, an active CSI, and I am joined here by Kristin Dilley, a podcaster, a teacher, a writer, and a victims advocate, along with Bill Thomas, the brother of Kathy Thomas, one of the first victims of the Colonial Parkway murder, also a podcaster and writer and TV personality, and I could not be in better company. And I thank you both for allowing me to be here.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Why don't the two of you just start by telling us a little bit about who you are and your podcast and how that came to be?
Okay. You want to go first?
Sure. So I started working with Bill in 2016 when I got into my head to write a book about his sister's case.
We were both teenagers at that point.
Maybe.
You were.
I was going to say.
Okay.
I think you're slightly older than me. Just a little.
Oh, God.
bit.
Yes, I would.
Do we want to pull the age card?
No, let's just keep going. You were doing so great.
I wasn't, then you interrupted me, but that's all right.
So what else is new?
Right, absolutely.
I'll be quiet now.
So I reached out to Bill because I wanted to write a book about his sister's case, and thus began the partnership that continues to this day. We started our podcast, Mind Over Murder, in 2020. It was pre-pandemic. Please note, we were not a pandemic podcast.
Right.
We were before the pandemic. And that really came about because Bill kept being asked to guest on podcast after podcast. And I said, hey, bud, when are you going to start your own podcast? And you said...
I said, I'll do a podcast if you'll do a podcast. Because I figured the last thing the world needs is another white guy of a certain age, that would be me, talking about whatever, true crime or cars or sports or cooking or you name whatever your interest might be. I thought, man, that's going to be really boring. But I thought if we could get a different perspective and have a woman's point of view. Kristin grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, where the Colonial Parkway murders are centered. I've never lived in Virginia. And so she had actually grown up with the Colonial Parkway murders on some level back when she was a teenager. And interestingly, even though we come at this from our own perspective and Kristin's own life, she was also touched by violence in that a friend's mother was brutally murdered, which is how she got into the true crime space, much in the same way that I got into true crime because of my sister Kathy's unfortunate homicide. But I thought having the two of us mix it up and come at our stories from two different points of view would be really good. And has been, interestingly, although I'm significantly older, if you haven't figured that out already, and we grew up in different parts of the country, and we come at this thing from our two differing backgrounds. We actually rarely disagree, although we have a commitment with the podcast that if Kristin thinks I'm wrong or vice versa, we'll both weigh in. But the truth is, we almost always arrive at the same place. And sometimes Kristin will say, a lot, I've been thinking, and I'll think, wow, that's a really good idea. I don't know why I didn't think of that. But it's been a really effective partnership.
I think so, too. And here's to many more years of doing Mind Over Murder together.
Well, and moving the Colonial Parkway murders and lots of other cases forward.
Y'all have that chemistry that you just can't predict, and you certainly can't force it. It just happens. But what really comes through for me is the friendship.
Yeah.
It's very clear. For anybody that maybe doesn't really know the outline of Colonial Parkway murders, can you just give a basic understanding?
You want to do this one, or you want me to?
Why don't you go ahead, because it's
All
your
right.
sister's case.
We'll try to go through really quickly. The biggest challenge for us in the Colonial Parkway murders is there's all these rabbit holes you can go down. We'll try to avoid the rabbit holes and just give you the quick overview if you're not familiar with the case. So with the Colonial Parkway murders, what you have are 4 double homicides of couples. Sometimes we say 4 years, but it's really 3, 1986 to 1989. It's approximately 1 couple a year for 3 years in a row, starting with my sister, Kathy Thomas, and her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski, who were brutally murdered in October 1986. A year later, a second couple, David Knobling and Robin Edwards, were murdered under somewhat similar circumstances about a half an hour away. So now we're going from October 86, September 1987. Then the following spring, a young couple go missing on a first date. Robin Edwards and
Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey disappear on a first date. They're actually never found. To this date, technically they're missing persons, but it's been 36 years. I don't think they're walking through the door tomorrow, sadly. And then finally, a fourth couple is killed. Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps were killed, and they went missing over Labor Day weekend 1989, and then their bodies are found about 6 weeks later in a hunt club. Now, one quick thing with the Colonial Parkway murders, interestingly, the only serious couple is actually the lesbian couple. My sister Kathy and her girlfriend Rebecca Dowski have been seeing each other for about 6 months or so at the time of their deaths. And we actually hadn't met Becky yet. We were supposed to meet her that Thanksgiving. And of course, they died in October. The other couples are almost somewhere between on a first date and traveling companions. For Robin Edwards and David Knobling, they met that day. For Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey, they were literally on a first date and went to a college party and disappeared thereafter. And Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer, Anna's actually dating his brother, Clint. Yeah. And so they're traveling together down to Virginia Beach, and time permitting, we'll get into more detail. But we say couples a lot, but we're actually not necessarily talking about serious couples. We're actually talking about people that kind of almost don't know each other very well.
Like many of you, I feel invested in this case because Bill and I, when we first met, and y'all, I've worked with hundreds of families, but let me tell you about Bill Thomas. We're talking on the phone, and I said, you don't know me, but I think there might be a forensic thing we can try here on your sister's case. So I mentioned the MVAT, if y'all are familiar with Jerry Bradley, who's here. He said, I don't know what that is. What is it? So I told him very briefly, y'all, the next thing I know, I see on Facebook where Bill flew to another state to meet with Jared to get this done. And I'm like, this is what I'm talking about. He is a man of action. It's beyond anything I've ever seen a family member do, quickly and just so controlled about it. And then the events of January the 8th, which I would like for y'all to talk about, I get a text while I'm at work from you. And I'm like, I know she's teaching. I know she's busy. So I think this must be something. When I looked down and saw there's been a break, it was almost more than I could take. So I want y'all to talk about that day because I talked to you first, and just the emotion that I could hear and also felt. But y'all take it from there, honey, January 8th.
It was a heck of a day for sure. Yeah. So on January 8th, the Virginia State Police and the FBI held a joint press conference. And during that presser, they announced that Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., who was 63 years old, of Lancaster, Virginia, had been connected to the Robin Edwards and David Knobling murders via DNA. And this was huge. We also received new information about a victim that we were totally unfamiliar with, a woman by the name of Teresa Howell. At the same time, we learned that Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. had died in his home in 2017, so there was no arrest made. But for us, it was a very big deal because this is the first significant case break over the 37 years that Bill and his family and the other families have been involved in this case. So this was massive. And it's also the first time that a single homicide victim was connected to the couples in the Colonial Parkway murders. And so suddenly we're in a whole new world of information that we're getting. Not only do we have a suspect and he's been linked via DNA, but maybe this isn't as cut and dried in terms of couples killings as we had originally thought. But Bill, you had a very different experience than I did on January 8th because you weren't watching the presser. Would you like to tell the good folks out there what you were doing?
It's interesting. Let's step back for 1 second. About a year ago, we got a call with a tip And we've developed a lot of contacts in law enforcement and in a lot of different places. And we got a call that the Virginia Department of Forensic Sciences had applied for and received a SAKI grant. If you're not familiar, Sexual Assault Kit Initiative grant. This is federal money that goes to state and local law enforcement to test untested rape kits and other evidence. It's an incredible program. I urge everyone to ask their law enforcement agencies, have you applied for a SAKI grant? If there's any talk, and there was a lot of talk in our case about we don't have the funding to conduct this forensic test or that forensic test. So we got a call that the Virginia authorities had requested for and received a SAKI grant, and that SAKI grant led directly to this big step that Kristin's talking about in the Colonial Parkway murders. They tested the rape kit from 14-year-old Robin Edwards, and that led directly to them identifying Wilmer. And we notice how we keep saying Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. One thing we feel really bad about is there is an Alan Wade Wilmer Jr., his son, who's a grown man now. So we try to be very specific. We were talking about senior here. But that testing of that evidence, which was very badly degraded, it was over 36 years old.
Yeah.
It'd been tested numerous times over the years, and as Matt can tell you, certain types of DNA testing consume the evidence. And it was also evidence that was exposed to seawater. So it's a complicated and difficult sample. The first lab that did the testing was unsuccessful, but the good news is they didn't use any of the DNA to make this determination.
Right.
So a second lab was then asked to do testing. I think I know who it is, but I don't want to credit the wrong lab, so we'll leave their name out of it. But it's a highly respected lab who's done other work for us in the Colonial Parkway murders, and they were able to get a profile. That then led directly, we believe, to the identification of the killer of Teresa Howell,
right,
who was the name that Kristin was talking about, the person we were not familiar with.
Because right before they named her, y'all had never even heard her name.
Nope.
No, not ever.
Now, our contacts in the media had told us several months prior to the press conference that there had been a development in our case, and they actually had identified for us the suspect, his brother, who's also sometimes mentioned in connection with this case, and Teresa Howell's name, which was brand new to us. So we knew about this in October 2023, and then the press conference came on January 8th.
Yes.
We didn't get into why I was tied up.
I think we should. I think it's a fascinating look into what all has been going on in this case with regard to a certain federal law enforcement agency that we're not going to name.
Sure we are. I will.
You go ahead and throw them under the bus then. It's cool.
Okay, happy to. And hello to our friends from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Who listen to the podcast, by the way. We know this for a fact because they've even contacted us and asked us to make corrections, which we're always happy to do. And now the Virginia State Police also listen, so it's fascinating. So we appreciate the fact that they listen, and they're going to watch this thing too. If you are killed inside a national park, it's an FBI case since day one. Now remember, my family and I have been dealing with the FBI for 37 years. Sometimes there are frustrating moments. This was one of them. Mm-hmm. Our agent, who I've been working with for the last decade, contacted me to set at 7:30 in the morning to set up a call that afternoon, or it was a Monday, if I'm not mistaken.
It was Monday. Mm-hmm.
For 1:30 p.m. Having worked with this agent for a decade, and I really like this agent, she doesn't usually contact me 6 hours in advance to say, hey, Bill, can we talk at 1:30 p.m. today? She usually calls me or texts me and asks me to call her. And you probably figured this out. This is a case that's very important to me. So usually I'm on the phone with her within 5 minutes if I can get away. And my long-suffering life partner, Pamela, who's absolutely wonderful, can't tell you how many times I've walked out of dinners, lunches, meetings, you name it, to take a call from our FBI agent. But so when she called and said she wanted to talk at 1:30, I thought, this is odd. Mm-hmm. And then over the course of that morning, Kristin reached out to me and she said, that press conference we've been waiting for, it's happening, and it's happening today. And I said, oh, okay. A short while later, Kristin comes back and says, looks like it's going to be at 1:30 p.m. So I texted our agent back and I said, is it your intention that we're going to watch this press conference together? And she said, no. And I said, well, that's odd. So at 1:30 p.m., when the rest of the world was watching the press conference, I was on the phone with our FBI agent. Now, those of you that know me or listen to Mind Over Murder know that I tend to be pretty direct. This was done deliberately so that I couldn't watch the press conference in real time. As you can imagine, while I'm talking to our agent, I got the iPhone set up on the desk there. The top third of the screen is where the texts are coming in. So I'm talking to our agent, whom I really like, and I'm learning a lot. We talked for like 2 hours and 15 minutes, which is long. But the top of my screen is just blowing up. Bill, are you following this press conference?
Yeah.
Why aren't you commenting on social media or whatever? And the texts start coming in faster and faster. Basically, they're saying, Bill, where the hell are you? Your sister's case is being discussed at a national level, and you're saying nothing. You've gone radio silent. And then, of course, things explode after I get off the phone with the FBI 2 hours and 15 minutes later. I literally wasn't able to watch the press conference until 10 o'clock that night when things finally began to calm down. And then I knew why the FBI didn't want me to watch the press conference. Mm-hmm. Because I wasn't going to be happy. I was thrilled for the two families and this new family that we hadn't heard about, the Howells. We were thrilled about this news, but I quickly realized there's a lot of very important information that's not being said publicly about this significant development in the Colonial Parkway murders. First of all, this guy, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., was also a suspect in the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. Remember, we went through those cases quickly. Mm-hmm. They've linked him via DNA to incident number 3, but he actually was the leading suspect in incident number 2, the disappearance of Keith and Sandy. And even at the press conference, journalists asked, can you say when this man first moved onto your radar? And this is important. They refused to answer the question. Twice, two different journalists who know this case said, can you say, and they said the answer was no. And so when your law enforcement agencies aren't being straight, you know you have a problem. Because as soon as I had a chance to watch the press conference at 10 o'clock that night, I realized this guy is the guy I heard about in 1988. This guy was under arrest by the FBI in 88, and they let him go. And that's why they didn't want to talk about this at the presser.
Now, Bill, I have a question. First of all, I didn't know the FBI was listening, so I'm Nancy Grace.
I would have known that voice anywhere.
And I just have a few more questions. Jackie, cut Kristin's mic. Okay.
You're in trouble now.
But why do you think that the local and state and federal law enforcement turned a blind eye to this guy? Like, what is your gut feeling about that?
I want to be fair. If we're talking about back in 88, this is real important for everybody to understand. This is before DNA.
Sure.
Now remember, Wilmer's identified all these years later via DNA, so we have tools now that we didn't back then. And they brought him in. He was at the absolute top of the list. They referred to him as suspect number one. But he passed a polygraph once. They gave him a second one, and the results were inconclusive. We've heard unconfirmed rumors that there may be a second man who was also given a polygraph. The agents, the case agents, whom my late father used to talk to frequently, these were names we all knew around the dining room table. And as you can probably imagine, of the 4 kids in the family, I was the one that took the greatest amount of interest in Kathy's case. So I remember having a lot of private conversations with my dad. But we knew that there was a waterman who was seriously looked at, and we were told it was 2 watermen actually, in 1988. So I want to be fair. At the same time, the case agents were rock solid certain they had identified the right guy, but I think this is one of those cases where they couldn't prove it.
They even told the families during a private family meeting, we are 99% sure this is the guy. We are 99% sure this is the guy. And I want to make sure that we don't move too fast past the point that I think is most important and that we don't want to get lost, which is the fact that after this guy was let go in 1988, he murdered Teresa Howell. Teresa Howell is dead because the FBI polygraphed him and cleared him and let him go. Teresa Howell would not be dead otherwise.
And this is where we get into the discomfort of the FBI. And then there's all this weirdness that's going on in the background of this case now, where they've told dozens of people, don't talk to Bill Thomas. And of course, most of those people, their first thought is, who the heck is Bill Thomas? And then when they find out who I am and who we are, they listen to Mind Over Murder and they learn more about the case. And then these people call me. And so all these people are coming out of the woodwork, and this in a good way, with more information. And of course, we're trying desperately to steer those people back towards law enforcement. But this is where I think law enforcement makes a tremendous mistake by playing all these stupid reindeer games like don't talk to Bill Thomas. I get it. I have a big mouth and I know I'm a bit of a handful. But I'm trying to figure out who killed my kid's sister. But telling people don't talk to Bill Thomas, all it makes them do is think, I got to track this guy down.
Right.
And I told the FBI, the occasional lapses into profanity, my mom would not be very proud of me. I told them as recently as a few weeks ago, you guys are effing this case up beyond all measure. And by the way, telling everybody in this case, don't talk to Bill Thomas, is completely not working. Because I have actually started now, you know how we all get bothered by spam calls?
Yep.
It's like a lot of people, I stopped answering my phone if it's a number I don't recognize. New policy, if you're from Virginia and you call, I'm going to talk to you. And a lot of these folks are saying very tentatively at first, hi, I'm so-and-so, you don't know me, have information. And in most examples, I'm like, I'm very happy to hear from you and actually do know who you are.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder. Before we get back to the podcast, just wanted to remind you that we have a GoFundMe effort going on right now. This campaign is designed to help us raise funds to help promote Mind Over Murder and specifically to push the Colonial Parkway Murders investigation forward. We'd love it if you could support us in any way that you can. Any donation from $5 to whatever you can afford is very much appreciated and will be incredibly helpful. The link is in the show notes and in our social media pages. As always, thanks for your support. Now back to Mind Over Murder.
But listen, we're 5 months in now.
Yeah.
What questions do you still have about Wilmer?
You want to fire away?
We have so much that we want to know about Wilmer, and I want to make sure that we focus not only on victimology too, but also the issues that you were talking about, which is how was he allowed year after year, given that law enforcement knew he was harassing couples on the Colonial Parkway? How was this guy allowed to continue going on doing what he was doing? But there's so many things that we want to know. How did he actually choose his victims in the first place? Is this random, or is he stalking them? How did he approach his victims? One of the things that you'll notice if you come by our booth is we are handing out postcards with all of this information about Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. And it includes some photos of his very distinctive truck with a vanity license plate. It's the state of Virginia, we're big on those. And his boat, the Denny Wade. We would really like to know, how did he approach his victims? Was he approaching on foot? Was he approaching in the truck? Was he approaching in his boat? We want to know, what locations was Wilmer frequenting when he was visiting our area, because he did not live in Tidewater. He lived in Lancaster County, and he was coming down here to do work as a waterman. So what areas was he frequenting? Was he frequently off the Colonial Parkway? Was he up in Middlesex? Was he in Hampton? Where was he? We are very curious about the behavior that he exhibited to his family and friends. Did anybody have an inkling that this was going on? And then, of course, we really do want to know exactly what you've been curious about, which is, why was he allowed to go free, even after passing this polygraph, if he was a prime suspect in Keith Call and Sandy Hailey's disappearances? That is just inexplicable to both of us. There's a lot to unpack there. And then there is the potential that he might be involved in other local cold cases. And despite the fact that the two of us say we are not investigators, we do a certain amount of digging in our copious amount. And there are a number of local cold cases that I think Wilmer might be potentially connected to. And those are things that we are exploring.
He's had 40 years.
He's had 40 years that he could be doing this for.
Absolutely.
And we have a lot of cold cases in Virginia.
And like when we talked, he had more than one vehicle, more than one way to stalk people. He had a truck. He had a business that would allow him to go here and there. He also had a boat. So he could literally see down the Colonial Parkway, either from the roadway or the waterway.
Yeah.
So it's an extraordinary, to me, vantage point when you're stalking people. No question about it.
And there are dozens of reports of someone matching Wilmer's description, driving this very distinctive truck that Kristin was talking about.
Yep.
Approaching them like a police officer would, demanding driver's licenses, but interestingly, not wearing a cop uniform, but something more like what a mechanic or a waterman would wear. But he'd come up and blitz attack them, banging on the window, demanding driver's licenses. Interestingly, never asking for registrations, which a real cop would ask for. And what I can't figure out is, the FBI's told me this over the years. They had dozens and dozens of reports. Why was the FBI and the National Park Service never able to put together the fact that this is all the same guy? These couples coming forward and saying, we're parked, we're making out, and all of a sudden there's this short, stocky, very beefy guy, only 5'5", pounding on the window, demanding driver's licenses, telling us we're in the wrong place or that we're not supposed to be there, like a cop would or a National Park Service ranger would. And why didn't they ever revisit him after they gave him the polygraph back in '88? He was a really righteous suspect. This guy checked so many boxes in the Colonial Parkway murders, it's scary.
And the polygraph, that could be a whole nother session, but the reality is, depending on what you're asked, in the order you're asked it could change whether or not you could pass a polygraph. So again, if he's just asked, were you here at this time? And if he wasn't, he could pass that question. So what would y'all like to see from law enforcement now? What would you like to see them doing?
From my point of view, the lack of transparency is just appalling. They would have been so much better off, and I did marketing and communications for 30 years. I'm not a law enforcement person, and we're not investigators, as Kristin said, but they would have been better off back on January 8th if they had said, we questioned this guy in 1988, and we didn't have DNA back then, and he passed a polygraph exam. I think they would have been better off if they just sucked it up and took their lumps. We understand that a case like this has got problems and complications that have occurred. It shouldn't be required that Kristin Dilley and Bill Thomas and local and extremely well-informed people from the media and the press, that we're suddenly saying, you're skipping over some really important details here, folks.
Yep.
And that actually, and this saddens me to say this because, believe it or not, I see myself as a supporter of law enforcement. I want to help. We want to help.
Yes.
But when they fail to deal with things in a straightforward manner, good, bad, and indifferent, they're building distrust. One of the things, we just did 2 live podcast events in Virginia, both of which sold out immediately and were very successful. We got a lot of support, which we very much appreciated. But one of the things people said at these live podcast events, we presented on the case, then we took an hour of questions at the end of each session. People said to us, Kristin and Bill, you're the only people that are answering questions honestly about the Colonial Parkway murders. And I don't know how the heck 2 podcasters, and one of whom is the brother of one of the victims, I don't know how it falls to us, but people are saying no one from law enforcement will answer these questions honestly.
Again, that could be another session.
Thanks, Nancy.
You're welcome. Nancy Grace, come see me at Podcast Row. Tell everybody, because I think social media is a powerful thing. And I will just say this, and not to change anything that you just said, but I think there is power in hearing from Kathy's brother, and in a way that law enforcement couldn't do it. I can talk about my sisters like nobody else. And I think that, to me, is what draws people to you. And then when we hear from your friend and your partner in every sense of the word in this investigation, and y'all keep saying you're not investigators to make a point, but I am, and I will tell you, yes, you are. You are. So when you talk about social media and that powerful presence, there are pages that the families have put up and y'all have championed, so let them know how to find those pages too.
Yeah, we have a lot of social media pages regarding the case. We have Colonial Parkway Murders, which is all of the information that you could possibly want. We have our Mind Over Murder podcast page, but we also have family members of the victims who started social media pages before we ever hit the scene.
Yeah.
And Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey's families started a social media page called Whatever Happened to Richard Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. And we also have a second page run by the families called Colonial Parkway Colonial Parkway Victims Gone But Not Forgotten. We also run our own websites, colonialparkwaymurders.com and mindovermurderpodcast.com. We are very active in those spaces, and we are attempting to do everything that we can to get out the information about Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. And we encourage anyone who has any information at all of any variety to please come forward to us, either anonymously or with a name attached to it, and tell us what you think you may know. There is no detail that is too small in this case.
We got tips, major tips, in the Colonial Parkway murders a little less than a year ago at the last CrimeCon.
Yeah.
Now
it works.
There was a bit of a kerfuffle
Yes.
with the FBI because I didn't have all the particulars. It took me a little time to track it was a husband and wife team who were here at CrimeCon in Orlando, and things got a little heated, and the FBI threatened to bring me up on federal obstruction of justice charges. my response, and my late mom, again, would not be proud of me, was, F you, go right ahead. As I said to the FBI, on what planet am I going to be withholding information in my sister's unsolved murder case? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you've shared more than he has.
Yeah. And now, I was ultimately able to track these wonderful people down and get their information to the FBI, and we smoothed things out a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think I'm not on the Christmas card list anymore, but I'm not being actively threatened with being brought up on charges.
I think that's a good segue. I think we should honor the victims and talk about them a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's really important to remember the fact that 37 years have passed by for these cases, and that is for Kathy and Becky in particular. And what we put up on the screen in front of you is the ages that these victims would be now had they lived. And so I want to very quickly name the victims and the ages that they would currently be. Robin Edwards, who was 14 when she died, would be 51 today. Anna Maria Phelps would be 53. Sandra Hailey would be 54. Larry Ann Powell, whose case may be connected as well, would be 54 years old. Keith Call would be 56. Daniel Lauer would be 56. David Knobling would be 57. Becky Dowski would be 59. Brian Pettinger, whose case may also be connected, would be 61. Terry Howell would be 64. And Kathy Thomas would be 65 years old.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And so you're going to have an opportunity in a little bit. We're going to open up the house lights, and you're going to be able to ask Kristin and Bill questions yourself, and they will answer anything. You see how open and honest they are. They would love to talk to you and have questions. So while you're thinking about those and coming to the two microphones, I will tell you something both about the two of them. So Kristin Dilley is one of those people, if she sees that maybe you've had a rough case or a rough day or something may be going on, she checks in with you immediately. And that's the kind of thing to me that is just extraordinary about her. Bill Thomas is no different. Walt and I decided, David and I decided we were going to take the twins on a trip. And we got into New York and our car broke down. Bill lives in Connecticut, calls me immediately and says, hey, you need me to come get you? You can stay at the house. This is who they are. So I just want you to know that. It's not something they do part-time. They are friend and just have your back at all times. So we have somebody at a microphone. So if we want to open up the house lights so y'all can see them.
Yeah, hi. My name is Rachel. My mom and my brother and I are here, and we all live in Richmond, so we're familiar with the case and particularly familiar with you guys.
Fantastic.
What I want to ask is about the inability of law enforcement to put Alan Wade Wilmer's DNA into CODIS and what sorts of alternatives exist there. Have they talked to his son or any of his children about providing DNA to compare?
Yeah, this is thank you. It's a fantastic question, and we appreciate it. And I think this is going to be a much larger issue than just the Colonial Parkway murders.
Oh, yeah.
Because Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. was never charged with a crime, and certainly not a felony, during the time that he was alive. According to the FBI and the Virginia State Police, they cannot put his DNA into the CODIS system. And we just think this is flat out wrong. Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. has been dead since 2017. What civil rights are we possibly protecting?
Exactly.
The guy's been dead for 6 years, going on 7. Now, we have a lot of friends that have been incredibly helpful to the case and moving it forward beyond just our good friend Nancy here. And so one of our law enforcement partners who's worked this case and is now retired and a bit more free to speak, frankly, he had said, Bill, I think the FBI is your biggest problem in terms of roadblocks. But he said the Virginia State Police are probably a close second. And he said, you can't lose sight of this fact that they don't want to put Wilmer's DNA into the CODIS system, and they're using this as an excuse, because if they put Alan Wade Wilmer Sr.'s DNA into the CODIS system, it will light up like an effing Christmas tree with other unsolved murders. And wait for it, there may be even some cases in Virginia that other people have gone to jail for that are actually committed by Wilmer. We believe this guy may be involved, and his brothers as well, in cases extending back 40 years. This guy has literally been getting away with murder perhaps for as long as 4 decades. So there's a big incentive for law enforcement to say, oh, so we can't put into CODIS. I actually think we need to be adjusting the rules for CODIS. If this SOB is dead, let's just put it in there and let the chips fall where they may. But you'll notice that there's a discomfort on the part of law enforcement to treating this case in a transparent way. That's at least the third time I've used that word today. And so that's a real challenge for us. And we actually don't have an acceptable answer right now.
I wish we did.
Ultimately, we think we're going to have to pursue maybe even legislation. And here's another crazy thing. We have 50 different sets of rules. Every state in the union has different rules for how they handle DNA in CODIS. Wow. We just talked about that on Monday's episode of Mind Over Murder. Lindsay Wade, who's a fantastic, very accomplished investigator, and whose book is nominated as one of the best books of the year, her book In My DNA. And she explained to us, not that we completely understood it all, and not that some of the answers were not unacceptable, but she was explaining how we ended up with this bizarre system where instead of having one set of rules, like a real country, as opposed to 50 different sets of rules. And I think we, the big we, need to do better. It's our intention when we solve the Colonial Parkway murders, note the optimism, I actually want to pivot to this larger issue of there are 250,000 cold case homicides in the United States. That ought to be a national scandal at this point. Think about it, 250,000, and that number's probably low. Cold case homicides in the United States, that's insane.
It is.
And as Lindsay was explaining to us on Monday's episode, 50 different sets of rules, this makes no sense whatsoever.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, just to follow up, my name is Ann. Is there a way to legislatively in Virginia do something about the CODIS rule?
This is something we're starting to explore, and this is something that our listeners, supporters, are very interested in taking a look at.
Yeah, I think you'd have a lot of support from this audience and from the whole of CrimeCon.
Yeah, right on.
Thank you.
Legislators to change the law.
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Jim. I have two quick questions. One is, has anybody talked to his family about putting their DNA in like a 23andMe kind of database so we could do some genetic testing?
Go ahead.
We have been in touch with his family, and they're appalled by what they have learned about their family member, and they do want to help in every way that they possibly can. And so we are working actively to talk with the family, and because they are willing to help, we hope that's someplace they're willing to go. Bill, I know you spent more time talking to his family members than I have. Is that something that they've indicated they're willing to do?
They seemed willing to do anything to help, which is, I talked to Kristin about this. I said, I'm now talking to the potential serial killer's family who this person may have killed our sister. It's just like, wow. I didn't expect it to go into that twisty-turny place. But they seem very willing to help in any way. And they've actually been lovely. And the truth is, we see them as victims too. They're not responsible for something that their ex-husband, father-in-law did.
Yeah.
But boy, talk about a situation that they hadn't anticipated. Yeah. But they seem willing to do anything to help law enforcement get to the bottom of the case.
And
Love it.
something I've always wondered about, you've been working on your sister's case for 40 years. It's solved. So now what do you do? Is there a letdown? Is there a sigh of relief? Like,
Well, we're not there.
Well, I can tell you what he's going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not there yet, but
He's just getting started.
yeah, I actually would like to work on these broader issues.
Yes.
Because it's funny, we've interviewed a lot of people from other cases. We don't just talk about the Colonial Parkway murders. And boy, it's pretty easy, I find, to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's gone through something somewhat similar, because it's an experience that we all share. What John Walsh says, you're invited to join the club that no one wants to be invited to join. So I think our intent would be to broaden out to these other issues.
Absolutely.
Yep. The remarkable thing is Kathy will be responsible through you of helping thousands and thousands of families.
Yeah.
That to me is a remarkable thing.
Yeah.
And what a legacy for both of you.
Yeah.
Because she wanted to serve her country, and she is.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's true. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Crystal. Thank you for doing this, and I listen to your podcast. I really like it. My question relates to the Colonial Parkway murders, but also just Virginia more broadly. I was in grad school in Virginia in the 1990s, so I recall it was a dangerous place. I didn't know at the time, but it was a dangerous place. I still am a Virginia resident, and just being aware of whether it's these cases, and just listening to you all talk about the challenges that you've faced in trying to just get more information and help law enforcement, but then also the Route 29 stalker, the Shenandoah. I'm leaving a few others off, but the more I learn, I'm learning that there seems like there's a lot of cold cases, potential, frankly, serial killers that have been roaming around Virginia for several decades. So my question is anybody looking into this, or more broadly, like, is there, in other states you'll have like the state police that may have a task force of 2 people that are trying to put together all the cold cases or something, and I'm not hearing anything like that in Virginia. It just seems like it's just this black hole of cases that are clearly at least about 3 or 4 major serial killer type cases, and they've just gone into a black hole. So I'm just knowing that you guys are aware of and involved in a lot of what's going on in Virginia. I'm just curious if you have anything to say or to share with those of us who are in Virginia in response to that.
It is weird, isn't it, how are so many serial killers in Virginia, and a lot of them were operating at the same time. If you look at someone like Randy Taylor, who was operating at the same time as Jesse Matthew, for example, in the same area around Charlottesville, how inexplicable is it that you have 2 serial killers in the exact same area right around the exact same time? It is a little weird. We do have some podcasting colleagues who are also interested in looking into the very things that you've brought up, and so we do work with them and explore these kind of concepts of why are there so many serial killers in this area of Virginia? Why hasn't more been done to try to figure out why precisely that might be? But yeah, that is definitely something that we're interested in, and we have been watching with satisfaction the creation of the Virginia Cold Case Database, and are very interested in seeing how that database grows and develops over the next couple of years. But if you want a good afternoon's worth of reading, go into the Virginia Cold Case Database for a little bit. It's interesting, but it's also kind of hair-raising, just like you said.
Is anyone working those cases, or?
We think there's more of an effort being made now. And of course, it's exciting when you start to see some solves and family members are getting answers. So our sense of it is that more resources are being put into these cases, certainly more than in recent years.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Christina. First, I want to say I really admire all the dedication and love and way you've honored your sister. We should all be so lucky to have a brother like you.
Amen.
Agreed.
Next,
Thank you.
I was just curious if this Wade Sr., if you guys have gotten any facts about his life. Did he have like domestic violence, animal cruelty, the neighbors complaining?
What we're getting so far, and we're not experts on all things Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., but there almost seem like he's living 2 lives. His family and friends and people that knew him in Lancaster County, which is a couple hours north of Williamsburg, they don't, for the most part, they don't have any experiences with him that are consistent with the idea of him being a serial killer. Now, they do understand that he's definitely linked via DNA to the murder of at least 3 people, and I think there are more. But it almost sounds like after he was married for 6 years, they were divorced, and after his divorce, as he would make his way down towards what Kristin calls the Tidewater area of Virginia, where he's working with the boat, fishing, crabbing, oystering, he seems to then move into this really extended dark period. Now, his family is potentially linked with other murders in Lancaster County, also unsolved, and which extend back, and that's where we're getting the 40 years from. But Wilmer's kind of acting out, if you will, or being an active serial killer seems to be concentrated mostly when he's living down in the Hampton, Virginia area, working on his boat.
It's a real Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde sort of thing, if you'll pardon the English teacher reference for a couple of minutes.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Emily. I was actually really curious how you decided to start the podcast. Was there something about your work on the cases that made you think, hey, we can reach a wider audience with the podcast? Or was there another reason why you decided to start the podcast?
Oh, I think it's because I had guested on many of the podcasts here on, now we're calling it Creators Row, Podcast Row, and a number of those podcasters said, Bill, you're really good at this. You should do a podcast of your own. And Kristin heard them sometimes even say it on the air.
Yes.
And she said, yeah, you should do a podcast. So I said, let's do a podcast together. And we thought it would be a logical outgrowth of the work that we were doing together to move the Colonial Parkway murders forward. And one of the things that we've tried to do, and for those of you that have listened to the podcast, we've met all these amazing people along the way. You meet somebody like Sheryl McCollum. And she's got this fascinating background as a real-life CSI. So not only is she helping us and providing us with great advice and educating us, quite frankly, we then turn around and we said, hey, would you come on our new podcast? And she says yes. And so all these amazing people that we've met over the last 15 years or so, we've asked them to come on our show and talk. We talk with authors and investigators and forensics experts. And a lot of what we're doing is we're talking with people that we would like to get to know better and learn from, and taking the audience along for the ride. And I think people have really enjoyed that as a result.
And we thank you all very much for coming along on the ride with us. We really appreciate you.
Thank you for coming this weekend.
Please stop by our booth and do pick up some of this information about Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. We are on Creators Row, booth 61, right next to Mac.
I was just going to say, I know there's 2 people still at the microphone, but we literally have 15 seconds left, and we have to move so the other people can set up. But they are on Creators Row. Please come by and talk to them. They need to talk to you, ma'am. So I'm going to make sure y'all connect, okay? Absolutely.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Man, that was quick.
We hope you enjoyed the session. As a reminder, if you're heading out for another session or taking a quick break, please collect all your personal belongings before exiting. For security purposes, no bags or personal items may be left unattended at any time. Thank you for your cooperation.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.